Welcome back, everyone. This is Tangents and Shenanigans. I'm here with my buddy again, Jacob. How's it going, buddy?
Hey, hey, what's going on, guys? This is not sponsored by G Fuel
This is not sponsored by G Fuel, nor is it sponsored by Liquid IV or Squarespace or BetterHelp. We're
or NordVPN or Raid Shadow Legends when that was a thing.
when was that a thing, actually? Oh my
Oh, I
gosh.
would say like 4 years ago.
Well, what wasn't really a thing is this movie, actually. When this movie came out, 2018, starring Natalie Portman, Oscar Isaac. When
Tessa
this
Thompson, who was in the Thor
Yeah, she
movies.
played Valkyrie.
Yeah, and then there was, I think, Jennifer Jason Lee, I think
Jennifer
that's her
Jason Lee, yeah,
name.
she plays Dr. Ventress. Yep.
To be honest, the only thing I remember her from recently was Hateful Eight. I remember her in
Yeah.
that movie.
Yeah, she was I liked her character. Jennifer Lawrence was originally going to play the girl that needed to be the hanging, um Daisy Domergue, but I think during the time there were like scheduling conflicts, I guess, probably for the
Hmm.
X-Men movie she was doing. Yeah. Going right into this, this movie wasn't really talked about. Like it kind of flew under the radar. I remember seeing it in theaters when it first came out, and several scenes, which we will talk about, kind of scar me, especially the one involving the bear. Um, but what were your first impressions looking at the box art for it, like the title cover, and what you thought the movie was going to be about?
Um, well, it's interesting. And then, when you talked about kind of reception, I just was looking at kind of box office to budget, and it looks like, it kind of broke even, didn't seem to be. And I remember people hearing about it, but I I I think the two things that really stuck out to me about this film, a lot of people said how disturbed they felt,
Mm-hmm.
and I think a lot of that was specifically the song, the score that they did for this music. Even Nicole, uh, what was it? She talks about how she saw it and that the music was like the scariest part, and that it really kind of disturbed her, and that she wouldn't want to watch it again, so like almost solely for that reason, along with the other bits that we'll get into. So that's something how I knew about it before, and then obviously Natalie Portman, kind of a triple A star, kind of a unique premise. You know, I didn't really know much of. I mean, I knew it was some kind of survivalist because of the trailer and just kind of pieces you can put together from that. Like even like if I only saw the trailer for like 30 seconds,
Mm-hmm.
like an elevator pitch. But right when this film started, like maybe within the first 5 minutes, the immediate response or feeling that I had was this movie reminds me of Arrival, and like it reminds me of Arrival. That's the first response. But then by the end of the movie, I was like, oh, it reminds me of Arrival, and it reminds me of the movie Alien, like put together.
Yeah, that's funny that you brought up Arrival because there are elements of Arrival that kind of touch in this movie. Like there's an alien organism, and by the way, the track of that song, the like
Hmm.
that track is actually called Alien, which confirms like this is an alien organism crash landing on Earth, and it's here just to like spread, create, however you want to interpret it. I mean, the title of the film is Annihilation, and fun fact: this is actually the first book in a trilogy called the Southern Reach trilogy, or I think it's called Area X. So the first one's called Annihilation, which I did read. I definitely enjoyed the movie more. Um, the second book is called Authority, and then the third one is Acceptance. And I'm like, ooh. I'm like, okay. And the second and third book are significantly longer than the first book. So I think the first one is to like draw you in to what the shimmer is. And we'll get into
Hmm.
depth about what the shimmer is represented as. There's a bit of referencing in the book, but again, like it doesn't end where the movie ends. And Alex Garland, the director of this movie, said that he read the first book and he knew that there were more, but he just, and I respect his decision for doing this. He wanted to make the movie as captivating as possible, based solely on the first book, and then to expand on that. He's like, I just want to make this one film with things I really liked and enjoyed from the book, and obviously create my own vision for what the author was trying to, trying to portray. And I thought he did a great job. Like visually, this is a stunning film. Um,
And, and that's an admirable trait to have, because I think we see so many films over the last 15, 20 years just all about like universe building or be all about legacy building, where you make the film to start a whole chain of future films. But that's not what going to the movies is about. Like, going to the movies is watching one specific experience and having that be a complete story on its own. Historically, I would argue that those types of filmmaking where you're having continuations, where you're having expansions that are marketed and well known, because there's a lot of times you'll have a film that stands alone, but then they decide, oh, that was so successful, let's find a way to tie that to the first one and make a new one. That's
hmm
fine. But television historically has always been the kind of episodic format, which has been adapted to the movie kind of industry. I mean, obviously the most obvious example is Marvel,
Marvel, yeah.
but there's a lot of other, kind of science fiction, fantasy genres that are doing it too. And so to literally state that, hey, I just want to make this a like great as a standalone. If the tides had turned and this had been a commercial success and had done well, I think that if we looked back on this film, we would have given it much more appreciation and applause for the production company, because because it's noticeable. We definitely have seen movies where, yes, there's multiple installments, but they treat each installment with respect and don't have it lean on other pillars of other films.
Yeah, just focus all of your energy on making this one seamless story. And if you want to leave like an ambiguous ending where a sequel could happen, or there could be like a continuation of some sort or a prequel in that matter, like just focus on making a solid story. And then not have the anticipation or expectation to make more just because the first one was successful. Um, so yeah, I agree with that. Well, with you know, one thing I noticed with this film, one of the themes, and I'm curious if you caught on this, was kind of centered around self-destruction. Like a cancer, because like the obviously the opening shots of the film shows this meteor like crashing into this lighthouse on this beach, and I believe the film takes place around Florida. Um, and you see like this shimmering light refraction um, essence around this lighthouse as soon as the meteor impacts, and then cuts into the title, Annihilation, Fade to Black. But then you see um, on a screen the stage of mitosis, the cells dividing, and then we hear Natalie Portman's voice, and she happens to be a professor of biology in this school, and she's talking about this cancer cell and how it's replicating, and anyway, so cancer in and of itself could also be seen as self-destruction, and through several of the characters that we meet, each of them are running from or trying to escape a part of their life that obviously is bringing destruction. For example, like Natalie Portman, we find out that she has an affair with her husband. Husband finds out. She's just, she's kind of going on this route of destroying her marriage. There's Jennifer Jason Leigh's character, Dr. Ventress, who we find out actually has cancer, and she's seeing the shimmer as I want to find the answers that are involved, that she's kind of following her instincts on blind intuition, thinking that she's going to find a cure for her, for her condition. Um, and then later we see other characters that are brought together, the other scientists that are going to embark on the journey into the shimmer. And each of them, we find out one of them was suicidal, one of them was fighting addictions. The other one was suffering the loss of their like a family member. So it's kind of interesting to see how that theme follows through with the film, and how the characters adapt to these changes when once they're actually in the shimmer, seeing what's happening to the previous crew and seeing what's happening to themselves. Um, and there's a lot, obviously there's a lot of confusion, and when you're confused, people can, act kind of irate, or
Hmm.
irrational. Um, and in the so obviously in the opening shots we see Natalie Portman. We see her in this in this college, and she brushes up against the person that she has an affair with, and I believe his name is Dan, who's another teacher, and kind of asking her like, hey, my wife and I are having a barbecue. Why don't you come over?
Oh, which immediately how she responded, very suspicious. You knew that there was some kind of layer backstory that we were going to learn about just by how she responded.
Yeah.
And when you watch the movie for 5 minutes, you say, oh, maybe she's responding that way because of her husband. But I don't know, the way that responded, and it's like, oh, the husband's missing. I think there was a part of me that wanted me to believe it's like, oh, it's because she's mourning. And then as it, once she ran into Kane's character, I did think about that interaction. I said, oh, I bet you that's more because of guilt. Like there's something that like something else has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it definitely, they already kind of foreshadow within that dialogue.
Right, right. And he even tries to like kind of like caressing her shoulder, like, "Hey, it's okay. Like, why don't you come? It'll be fine." And she's like, "No, I'm going to paint the bedroom." And he implies that, "Look, it's almost been a year. Like you need to move on. Why don't you come just, get out of the house?" So I see where he's coming from, but again, like the viewer not knowing the chemistry or the relationship between the two teachers, we'd kind of see them as colleagues, but there's still something that's just beneath the surface. Like, what could that be? Um, so we cut over to Lena at home, and she's painting this room. And dude, I'm gonna say right now, the song that's playing in the background, "Helplessly Hoping," is so uncanny. Like it feels like this song doesn't fit with the tone and the mood. But I'm like, okay, like I'll go with it. And then as she's painting the room, um, we cut from her and we see different portions of the house, lights coming in, and then all of a sudden we see Oscar Isaac's character, her husband, Kane, and he just magically appears. We don't see him like walking through the door. We just happen to see him climbing up the steps, and then stands in front of the doorway. And then we cut to look over to Lena, and she turns around, and she's like gasping for air. She's like, "Oh my god!" Like you could tell, like she sees someone that she recognizes, and then she drops the paintbrushes and then goes to Kane. And immediately, it's I don't know how you felt, but I felt kind of like a little bit off-putting, just like with his stature. He's just standing there, not saying anything, um, and waiting for her to come to him. And when she embraces him in a hug and tries to give him a kiss, it's like he doesn't know what to do or how to respond to this affection. So immediately you know something's off. And we already understand that he's been gone for almost a year. So you would expect a happy return, if that really was the case of her husband. But when they go downstairs, and then we see Kane sitting at one end of the table, and Lena's standing, asking him questions like, "Where were you? Can you tell me where you were? Like, where were you stationed at?" And he just kind of repeats like, "I just remember I appeared here, and then I saw you, and I recognized you, and that's it." So he's not really giving much, and she can't quite tell if this is like an authentic reaction or if he's just struggling from whatever the mission that he just came back from. Like she doesn't know the stress levels that he might have faced. So she's still confused. She's got that look of confusion on her. And if you noticed, um, the glass of water that's on the table, when Lena finally sits down, Kane's arms are kind of like on the center of the table, and then she reaches out, and you can see like the reflection of their hands touching. through the glass of water. But what's strange is the reflection almost looks as if they're fusing together when she slides her hand over his and then pulls away. So it's really weird. Um, but it was kind of interesting. I was curious if you noticed that at all, like if you caught
I
that.
I didn't notice that, but obviously I think the one thing which makes me even ask more questions after I finish the film, obviously Kane comes in and he's got this yee suspicious haircut.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and then he comes up and Lena's character I thought really sold it because I think most of the audience, by how he's standing and how the tone is, the audience wants to hesitate and be in a high tension environment. And I think that Lena's character has that too, but
Mm-hmm.
she just has her husband standing square in the doorway, not saying a word right in front of her. That must be such an overwhelming emotion
Right.
to have thrust upon you. You kind of brush off probably any gut reactions you're having about body language and how he's looking at you, and maybe the circumstances of like, why didn't you tell me you were coming, like, oh, how is it that I'm finding out when you're on my doorstep? Like, it's removing that suspicion.
Right.
um and then when they were sitting chatting, you know again, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I think the thing I want to return to towards the end of this film is, he can remember, based off what happens to conclusion, this character can obviously have basic motor functions and knows how to speak, can speak English and can hold a conversation, understand this, of how language and how behavior, psychology works. Um, and it can also, but I thought what was interesting with the perspective of watching the whole film is he also has memories where he knows who Lena is,
Mm-hmm.
and he also knows of like a lot of, he can answer questions that require the recalling of memory. And Natalie Portman's character also does this when it pans to her when she's in the same predicament. And I thought that was, it definitely raised a lot more questions
Mm-hmm.
as to how these memories, when you're in the beginning of the film, you're kind of like, how do you not remember? And then at the end of the film, I'm going, how do you remember this? Like, how do you remember these events, or how do you remember anything about your identity? So I just want to throw that out there because I think that's something really interesting to talk about at the end. But no, I did not see the hands fusing. She could tell by the body language that chemistry was kind of gone,
Mm-hmm.
and that then she starts kind of going into investigative mode because now it's becoming suspicious, and kind of the haze of the reunion is starting to go away. It's not coming from, oh my god, you're home, you've been gone for a year, turning into, where were you for a year, what were you doing, what was, it's like almost like a light switch.
Yeah, and what I forgot to mention is um in the beginning of the film, I think before the classroom scene was actually in that interrogation room with everyone in the hazmat suits, right? Um, and Benedict Wong plays this character called Lomax, and he's in a hazmat suit that's in this glass paneled room. A bunch of other people in suits are like staring at Natalie Portman's character, who's just on this chair, and Lomax is like questioning her, asking like what happened in the Shimmer, what happened to the team, and yeah, like you were saying, like I don't know, like the cadence is almost the same as Kane's arrival to the house and Lena questioning him. It's like, okay, this is kind of mimicking each other, both scenes.
Hmm.
Um, so, anyways, so going back to Kane and Lena's conversation, he goes to drink the water, and immediately after the water touches his lips and he swallows, he sets the glass back down on the table, and you see like a little bit of blood, like sinking to the bottom of the glass, and he immediately says like, "I don't feel so good." And then all of a sudden, we cut to an ambulance, and Kane is in there, almost going into like cardiac arrest. Blood spitting from his mouth. He's like seizing, and I thought it was kind of funny that Lena, who is not an EMT, not a paramedic, um, is over his body when one of the nurses or the paramedic techs should be doing that, and they're just kind of like sitting there, uh, and while the other guy is driving. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm like, is that really how it would go? Usually it'd be like Lena sitting on the side, and then the tech like right by the right by the person in need. So
Yeah, it's well, she's a biologist, and so I'm guessing that Hollywood translated that into kind of medical practice,
mhm,
which that's in the same kind of argument of like engineers versus like service repair people.
yeah,
Sometimes you don't need engineers might not be the exact fit for something that needs that kind of work.
like they could tell you how it operates. They could tell you how to put it together. Yeah. But so like when in the ambulance, all this chaos is happening, and then we see government official vehicles, SUVs, black SUVs, that start surrounding the ambulance and cause it to stop, almost crash. Lena's taken out by the armed security personnel, and they give her like this syringe because she's acting out. She's like, "No, my husband's in there, but like you guys need to help him." And she could just see like Kane like spitting out blood. Like he doesn't look good at all. I'm like, oh god, this is like a horror scene.
Hmm.
So after they give her the syringe in the neck, she slowly starts passing out, and then we cut over to this facility, which we understand is called Area X, and it's ran by this private, private military institution, and they are in charge of overseeing this shimmer. That I don't know if you caught this, but in the film, they mentioned that the shimmer has been there for 3 years, and it's expanded. It's expanded close to where they are, and Dr. Ventress, when she's talking to Lena after she finally comes to and the drugs kind of wearing off, um, she tells her like, yeah, this area will in 3 months be covered by the shimmer, and I'm like, okay, so it took 3 years to cover this whole area, yet it's gonna take 3 months to get to here. I'm like, okay, it doesn't. I don't know. Like I didn't quite
I mean,
understand.
it could be like an exponential growth,
Mm-hmm.
and that might put more urgency to getting things figured out. Kind of maybe in the vein of like a small plant might grow small, but then as it grows bigger, it starts growing at like a higher rate or a faster rate.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a biology major, so if anyone wants to correct me on that, please do so, and I will have be very humble and say that I do not know what I'm talking about. Um, yeah. Now, 3 years. I knew it was over a year. I didn't know it was 3 years. You know, I will say I was having a real like in terms of engaging with Dr. Ventress's character. I kept like flipping a coin as to like, ooh, I like the way she's approaching this role. To oh god, I don't like the way she's approaching this role.
It's almost like she's
Like I
bored, right?
yeah, but it just was like yeah, like as if the dialogue's being like the energy in the dialogue gets like removed like every other line. And I was having trouble, but
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. And we
but she ended. I liked her towards the end, so for me, I had no problem with her character. Um, but yeah, so what? It's been 3 years,
since
and
the
they
crash, yeah, since the organism like crashed into the lighthouse.
yes, and with her background, you know, they what was it? Was it the mission that they were supposed to go in to find the rest of the team, or to find this like, or was that only part of the mission, which was, hey, go find the source and figure out what this is? I'm trying to remember if there was any clause that was like, go figure out what happened to the team, like find them if they're still alive. I don't know if you remember that.
Well, the main mission was to find the source of impact, which was the lighthouse. So they knew that, and every team, I think they've sent in 11 teams from the start of their operation there, and no team member has come out except for Lena's husband, Kane. And I think that's why Lena is brought into this. It's like, hey, if you want to find the answers to what happened to your husband, the answers are in there. So Lena kind of like stumbles into this, but we also understand that she doesn't have anything or anyone waiting for her at home. and she's trying to find escapes just by, painting the room instead of socializing. So she doesn't really have anything to go back to anyway. So she already finds herself in the predicament of, well, I need to help my husband. He's in critical condition right now, as Dr. Ventress explains to her, and he's almost in like this coma. So Lena feels like if I'm gonna heal my husband, I need to find out the source of the issue. I need to find out answers. So the mission was to find the source. The I guess like bonus objective or side mission would be to find traces of the previous teams, but it wasn't the primary directive. So they just kind of like they just stumbled on that naturally. After this interaction with Dr. Ventress and Lena, we get a flashback to Lena and Kane in bed, um, and they happen to be talking about. I forget all of the conversation, but what I have written down here is they were talking about aging as a fault in our genes, like a fault in the genetics. Like it shouldn't be
Mhm.
there, but it is there. In this flashback, you can kind of see the chemistry then, like how they responded to each other and affection, and you could tell that they portrayed a happy couple. Um, and cut from that flashback back to the present, we then see Lena leaning off the railing of this rooftop with a few of the other characters that we'll soon be introduced to at this table, and they're kind of all talking. And one of them, Anya, played by Gina Rodriguez, she comes to Lena and kind of gets her to, hey, why don't you introduce yourself to the group? We're all here. And we are introduced to Cassie Shepard, who is a oh god, geomorphologist. I probably butchered that. Anya is a paramedic, and Josie, played by Tessa Thompson,
It's a
is the
physicist,
is
isn't
the
it?
physicist. Yes.
Yeah.
So each of these individuals are scientists or in the science field. Hell, science for the paramedic. But they're not just soldiers like the previous 11 missions or 11 teams that went in. So Dr. Ventress is going to lead this team of women and scientists to try to go into the Shimmer with a different approach than just a military background. But Lena, we find out she was in the military. She was in the army. Um, so she already has that military background. And I believe Cassie Shepard was also a cop, if I remember that correctly. So she also has firearm training. Um, but we have to imagine that their combat experience is minimal compared to the other teams that went in. That at least is established. And after.
It's one of my like big feedbacks that I think can be excusable. If you have 11 tactical teams going into a place and not coming out, and we're presuming dead, I don't know if I want to send another team that doesn't have survival capabilities as
Mm-hmm.
strong as that. That's my initial reaction, but I think what the excuse you can give is probably two things. One is the classic example of like, hey, you don't need a bunch of trigger happy soldiers to go in for. Maybe it's because you're trigger happy or because you're soldiers that this is happening. You're not thinking outside the box. You're thinking on the term of like uh, call like not caution but like
But we're in
hazard
combat. Yeah.
in combat, like a combat zone when it's not, and you're creating these combat zones because of your occupation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the other one is that Natalie Portman's character Lena is a soldier, and that others do have some like gun training. So it kind of lets you kind of let that slide a little bit. Um, you go, okay, well, she has it, and she knows someone who's kind of has some experience, so that's probably the best we're gonna get.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
yeah.
and while they're at this table, they're they're some of them are addressing the concerns regarding the Shimmer and what their intentions really are, and one of them actually alludes to one sergeant coming out from the shimmer, but is now hospitalized. So it's like no matter
Hmm.
what, like we don't expect a different outcome knowing that we're going into it. So it's like, how can we approach this differently than the other teams? Is what they're kind of talking about, and that's when they mentioned that Dr. Ventress is the one leading the team, and Lena still hasn't expressed, like she's kind of playing close to the chest with what she wants to reveal because she
Hmm.
doesn't want them to know that she's the wife of the sergeant that came back. So she doesn't want them to really know what her involvement is, apart from, hey, I'm a biologist and I happen to be a new member of this team. Um, so, yeah, so she doesn't share that Sergeant Kane is her husband, and then we cut over to another conversation with Dr. Ventress and Lena, where Ventress explains that she profiles and chooses candidates for every shimmer entry, and the fact that I think it was the computer screen that she was on. Lena happens to catch it, and it had something to do with like a scan, and she recognized it right away. She's like, oh, like this is cancer. So um, she kind of thinks to herself like maybe that's what Dr. Ventress's involvement is maybe going in here to possibly find a cure or find her answers in there. So I think that's
Hmm.
when she finds out. Um,
Now, now,
hmm,
one thing I want to ask. So when they go into this, I don't want to call it like a lair, but they go into the kind of whatever zone that you want to call it. Um, in the first 10 minutes, um, my initial investigative take of as to what this environment is, you start watching it and you start seeing some of the creatures and you start seeing some of the plants and some of the stuff that they're already talking about some of the challenges after the first night and like in the kind of the first official day.
hmm,
And my initial brain goes, oh, okay, well, the beginning of this film talked about, you know, um, mutations, and I'm going to assume that the dynamic for this area is that it does something to either accelerate your mutations, like accelerate evolutionary mutations, or it causes you to mutate in kind of a cannibalistic way uh, that you can't stop. And so, and the first thing for me, I just felt like that was very, I don't want to say obvious, but that was very much the kind of understanding of what the general audience would put together. I
hmm,
want to know if you felt that same way, because this movie is being presented, in my opinion, as like a bit of a mystery. Like, oh, my husband came back and he's acting weird, and then he got really ill from this place that no one seems to come away from, and people who come in don't come back, and we don't really know what it is or what it wants, but it's a threat, and so we need to figure this out. Like it's being marketed as this mystery. So I initially start putting on the investigative cap. Like if, and this is where I say it's like it's comparable to Arrival. Like you're trying to figure out what the end game is. You're trying to figure out the mystery of this phenomenon. And then when I was saying it's also half alien, like yes, alien, you're trying to figure that out too, but you're prioritizing like survival above that as a, hey, if this helps me survive, I will try to understand it, but I don't know what this is, and I don't think I have the luxury to learn it. Here, I feel like it's a mystery of something we're trying to solve, and so when I'm observing, that was my initial kind of reaction, was like, oh, there's something in the air or in this field that's causing things to mutate at an accelerated rate.
we cut back to another present moment, like current time frame, where Lena is being interrogated again by Lomax in the hazmat suit.
Mhm.
Um, he's asking questions about the expedition, like, what do you guys remember? Like, what happened to the team? And Natalie Portman's character, Lena, she seems slightly confused. Like, she's still questioning, like, am I really here? You know? Um, and trying to recall everything that happened, but a lot of it is like it almost seems like it's scrambled, like her thoughts and memories are scrambled from being in there. So even she can't quite say what happened. Um, so I think that's also part of the allure to it. The team doesn't know what it is, but they know that they need to find out what the answer is. So I think that's part of the intention with we want to we want to understand things that we can't explain, right? Things that we
Mhm.
can't comprehend. We spend time trying to learn, trying to investigate, and the closer you get to it, the more you'll understand. But the important part is once you've gone so close, it's important to take a step back and see what you've learned to process everything and to
Mhm.
not look at it so closely because then you lose the scale of the whole situation and you can miss things. Um, so now we actually have the venture into the shimmer. So we see the team fully loaded with gear, backpacks, weapons, and they set foot in the shimmer. And then um, we don't see what happens immediately after. What we see after they leave Area X and they go into the shimmer, they disappear, and then all of a sudden Lena wakes from her tent, and she's like, okay. Opens the tent and sees that the rest of the team has already set up camp.
Which
And
was a little unnerving, by the
yeah,
way.
because we don't
I
see them
was I,
setting it
I
up.
was waiting for this whole anticipation of like what's going to be the second you walk in and how's your initial thoughts,
Right.
and by waking up right after that and then not knowing, that definitely puts throws me in a loop, and that puts me in not a it puts me in an uncomfortable situation. Like it definitely adds a layer of tension, because now there's like, kind of confusion, there's being lost. I don't know what they're expecting, so I don't really know what's going to happen. And it definitely, I thought that was an interesting kind of approach.
Yeah, like because you're right. You wanted to see like what their initial reactions were once they crossed that field. But what's strange is we don't get to see that, and neither do our characters after it's revealed that none of them remember what happened once they passed the barrier. And accounting from their supplies that they went in originally with, there have been some rations that have been gone, indicating they've been there for a while. So they guesstimate about 3 to 4 days that they've been in there, which already is alarming. It's like, how do you lose track of 3 days like that? So that if you already were on edge, this is going to put you even more on edge and with more questions. So, is this place warping time? Is it, what exactly is this doing? So now you have, now the mystery is even larger. So once the team kind of like grabs their gear and assesses, Dr. Ventress is like, yeah, well, we need to find a way to the lighthouse, obviously. Which direction should we go in? And Cassie's like, oh well, you just point your fingers at the sun, and if it's at this spot, then it's about midday. So we have several hours of daytime left, and I'm like, okay, well there you go. That can come in handy if you're lost in the forest. Just use the measurements of your fingers and the distance to the horizon. Like that can work. Um, so they finally get their bearings and understand which direction is south, where they need to go, and so they start heading in that direction with Ventress leading the team. And they realize that they can't use any form of communications. The issue of not being able to contact HQ, you're basically they're stranded. Like you're fending for yourself in this situation.
Mhm.
Once they realize, like, okay, we have to rely on each other and our own instincts to get us out of this mess. So let's go on forward. And they start walking into the forest, and they start seeing all these mutations with like flowers, and the landscape has changed. Like there's different species of flowers growing from the same vine. It's like, how do we make sense of this? Lena's looking at it. It was like with like an amazement, but then also like with also caution, like in the expressions on her face, you know. And I kudos to her and her craft. I mean, I think there's a lot. I've heard there's power in stillness in acting. I think there's also power in just use of close-ups and facial expressions to understand.
Hmm.
Without dialogue, you can tell what the character could be thinking about.
Yeah, Ian McKellen does a very good job of that. That's the media actor I think of. He does a lot of acting through his eyes, and I think that he's a very much a great example of like, yeah, showing a lot of communicating a lot without having to say a lot
Mm-hmm.
or do a lot of dramatic movement.
Exactly. Less is more in that degree.
Hmm.
They make their way to a swamp. See a bunch of like rundown shacks. So the team is kind of like assessing and investigating the shacks, seeing if there are any survivors or remnants of a previous team. Then Josie like kind
Got
of
yeeted.
yeah, Josie like comes out of the door where we only see like she's facing outside the door of one of these shacks. That's
Which I should have known better. The way she was standing, I'm like, oh, she's just asking
yeah.
to to get grabbed by something.
It's like you never want to have your back towards an towards an empty space where something can like latch onto you. Exactly.
Yeah.
So you see her with half of her body in the doorway, looking at the team, but you don't see the backside of her. And then all of a sudden, she gets pulled in by something, and we're like, oh! Immediately, I'm like, okay, she's dead. This is the first. Lena runs over to try to grab her, and Josie's like, something's pulling at me. Something's pulling at me. It's grabbing my backpack. So they try to get her out of the water, and then a gator reveals itself, and it looks like an albino gator. And Anya starts like shooting at it, and Cass is like trying to shoot, and the gator's getting angry. It starts rushing on land, which the team is like scrambling to figure out like what to do in the situation. And I love what Lena does. She just like gets the gator's attention by a few warning shots, and then empties her magazine like straight into the alligator's like head and mouth. And the stance that she does, like ready and crouch, I'm like, okay, she's played shooter games before.
Oh yeah, I saw that. I was like,
Crouching increases your accuracy. Um,
hmm.
so after the gator is slain by Lena, they get in close. Anya opens the mouth for Lena to grab some samples from it, and they investigate the mouth inside the
And
gator.
there's like it's almost like a layer of like in the anatomy of like shark teeth that are not only the main teeth, but then like within its throat. I think I remember it
Yeah,
was like a
it's
layer, and it was like layers of teeth.
layers of teeth that are kind of like in a spiral pattern. It's really weird. Yeah, it's really weird. I'm like, first of all, I would never want to run into this creature but yeah, it was kind of interesting. And they were talking about like, oh, this is the pattern that sharks have. Like, could they crossbreed? And Lena says like, no, you can't crossbreed species. But this is clearly interesting. Um, and I'm gonna take some samples to take a look at it. So they leave that area, and thankfully Josie's okay. We didn't lose a team member, not yet. We're taken back to the interrogation current timeline with Lena and Lomax, and then we see, I believe it's for the first time that we see a tattoo in what looks to be like a figure eight, which is actually Ouroboros, the never-ending snake that's eating itself. Could also be referencing like infinity, like or a loop, you know, as far as like symbolism goes. I forget some of the questions, but again, it's like Lena's trying to recall what happened and play through her memories to Lomax as he's asking to the best of her abilities. And then we cut back to the team. Cassie and Lena are in the boat, which is kind of funny. Like they find boats by the the swamp shore, and they take it like, oh, we can cross the river this way and continue heading south. The rate of them paddling was significantly lower than the speed they were traveling on that river. I'm like, okay, there's no current. How are they going faster and they're just barely like paddling like, oh, la la la. I'm like, dude, you guys are zooming. How is this happening? Well, Cassie shares a little bit of her backstory with Lena,
Yes.
and we understand that uh, each of the members are, running from something. And that's when we learn like each of their faults in their own lives.
And what was she? What was Cass running from?
I believe she,
If I remember.
well, she said that she had suffered a loss in the family. I don't know if it was her cousin or her sister, but I don't actually remember. It's terrible. It's not that she's gone through the grieving process, it's that she hasn't even really started it yet. But I guess she's supposed to represent denial. Um, Anya, who is the addict, is supposed to represent anger. Um, and bargaining, can you guess who's doing the bargaining? I think Dr. Ventress would fit bargaining. And then I guess Lena is supposed to be the one that's representing acceptance. So back to the film, where was I? We start seeing another tie-in with self-destruction. Each of these people are having habits in their life that's keeping them from moving on. Something's holding them back. Once they reach the shore, they see this like mess hall, and it's actually where the previous team, the 11th team, has stationed up. They see like on a chalkboard, they have uh, like names of the people that went in. I think it's like 5 names, and it showed like shifts that they would take to be on watch. So it seemed like they were there for a while. They had a system. They knew that something was like chasing them, so they had to take point on like surveying the area while the rest of the team, um, you know, could rest a bit.
Which I don't understand why the point of watch was not where they were sleeping, because from what I recall, I think they were like in some kind of watchtower, sleeping up there, and then the person would walk down the watchtower onto ground level at some random little like kind of like little outpost like shed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was asking myself like, why wouldn't you want to be in the watchtower where you have, you know, like much better visibility and you're at a vantage point.
And the high ground,
So
yeah, exactly.
and the high yeah have high ground. So then nothing. It'll be harder for someone to sneak up on you, like a bear maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
I guess it
I
was.
don't
I guess it
know.
was just their. I guess it was just their decision to create a perimeter. It's like
Yeah.
have one team be, or have 1 to 2 personnel in the watchtower for the eagle eyes perspective, and since radio communication and walkie talkies didn't work, I'm wondering if they just shouted at each other. It's like, "Hey, we see something! Everyone, wake up!" Like how effective is that?
Yeah.
Um,
Now was that scene after though they found the base, the military base?
yes,
Because
they.
I will say, to me, the scariest part of this film is when they're looking at the videotape, and they see what was it, Kane's character pretty much gut one of his comrades,
Mhm.
and like all of the organs are like moving
Yeah,
inside.
it's like the intestines are like an eel or like a snake, and they're like slithering, and Kane like puts his hand in the his buddy's gut, and is like holding part of his intestine, and it's just like moving around. And the tape was left there by the previous team with a
and
note
and
for those who
and that
follow.
music and the music that was playing with
Mhm.
did that did freak me out a little bit. And then they showed they found the location where they filmed it, and they showed, you know it reminded me of Last
Last
of
of Us,
Us.
baby. I
Yeah,
know.
last it reminded me of Last of Us with the way how it like mutated. It almost looked like a fungal infection.
Yes.
And the fungal infection just took over its host and detached it from its body, which was a great, cinematic shot to have. I think the visuals directors had like a field day with that one. But yeah, I definitely wanted to shout that out. But you're starting to get answers to some of your initial questions. Um, and then to me, my narrative of, oh, this they're in a place that's causing their cells to mutate like at an alarming rate, or evolve at an alarming rate that is unnatural for the body to sustain. So
Mhm.
for me, that was kind of what I kept thinking about as these um, events were happening.
Yeah, and part of that discovery of the video, Lena doesn't show any sort of like expression to the team apart from herself when she recognizes like, oh shit, that's my husband, that's Kane, like that's the real him, and they're all questioning each other and commenting like, oh, so this team went crazy, like they're cutting each other up, like we don't know if we want to go forward. So half the team, like Anya and Josie, are like, maybe we should just go back. Like this is too dangerous now. We can tell what happened to the other team. They killed each other. This video kind of proves it. But we don't necessarily see anyone dying in the video footage. It's just them showing like, hey, can you see what we're going through? After that interaction, you see Lena going up to the corpse and the fungus in that like pool area. She collects a sample, which we understand that she's going to look at it later. Take him back to another flashback, but this time it's Kane about to leave on his mission, saying goodbye to Lena. And
Mhm.
if you noticed this, what he's wearing and the hairstyle, like with it slicked back, it's the same outfit that Kane arrived in the beginning of the film,
Mhm.
to see Lena in the first place.
And
So
it is important to note that, like, when he's in the mission, like his chair changes because he's out in the wilderness for an extended period of time.
yeah,
But when he comes back as if he had just left.
exactly. Yeah, I'm glad you caught that. The thing I noticed is in that scene, the flashback scene with before Kane leaves, you could tell it's a somber tone. And I think this is implying that Kane found out about the affair that Lena was having, and this is the reason why he wanted to go on this mission. He knew it was grave, he knew the risks were high, he couldn't tell Lena where he was going, and she was asking, like what language do they speak? Are you going somewhere where there's sand? Is there desert? What base are you flying into? And he doesn't tell her anything. So it's important, and it's big what he's about to embark on. But he says like, just know that I love you. Um, and then he leaves. Um, and then after that flashback scene, we come back to Lena waking up from, maybe she's like having that as a dream. So she wakes up from it and can't go back to sleep. So then she goes and sets up her equipment and her microscope, and she starts looking at the samples that she was collecting earlier in the film. And she happens to see a dead cell, and then all of a sudden, next to it, a shimmering cell replicating itself from that dead cell, and then more shimmering cells. So she's like, okay, this is interesting. Even in dead material, this whatever this organism is still finding a way to create life and mutate. Um, and then Lena obviously meets with Ventress in the Watchtower because she can't go back to sleep, and then they start talking about. I think the conversation comes up again about self-destruction, and I'm like, okay, this is the second time that it's talked about. Um, and so Ventress and Lena are in the tower, and they hear something over by the fence line perimeter. So they're looking. Lena gets out her night vision goggles, can't see anything until she sees the fence line and then a hole in the fence, like something had bust through.
Mhm.
And then some of the other team is then alerted. Cassie comes outside. She's on ground level. Uh, and then Anya and Josie then follow in tow. And then we hear, I don't know if we hear a scream right then and there as Cassie is being taken, or if she fires. Um, but
I think she gets taken. I don't think she fires a weapon.
okay, so and the only person that sees this is Lena because she has the night vision goggles. She sees like a figure in the shape of a bear take Cassie and drag her into the woods, like deep into the woods, and you just hear her screaming. And Anya and Josie are like, "Where is she? Like, what happened?" And Lena's like, "I don't know what grabbed her. Like, something grabbed her." But since Lena's the only one that sees this, the rest of the team are like acting, confused, and like they're gonna try to go after Cassie. And but then nothing happens after that.
And that's the smartest thing that party did. And
Yeah.
went, oh, this giant bear dragged one of our friends in a dark forest. We're gonna stop, and that person's probably gonna be dead, and we'll go and figure it out in the morning afternoon. And I was like, you know what? Oh man, smart cast we got here. Like just not falling into any of those horror tropes. I was very proud of them.
Yeah, because it cuts, and we don't really get a moment for them to do that because it immediately cuts to them next morning, and Anya and Josie are like, "We don't want to go forward. Like, we don't know what happened to Cass. Now she's not here. We want to go back." And Ventress is like, "Well, you guys decide what you want to do." And then she leaves, and then obviously Lena is confronted by Anya, and Anya's like, "Hey, like, why didn't you back me up there? Like, don't you want to get out of here too?" And Lena's like, I'm not taking sides. Like, if anything, I agree with you that we should get out of here, but we don't know how to get out. So I think the best way is to go deeper in, so we can find the coastline and then make our way out. Because at least we have, at least from that point, we have a direction to follow once we make it to
which
the
I thought
coastline.
which I thought was a very reasonable argument. Because at first when they're like, "Yeah, go deeper," and I'm like, I don't think that's the definition of getting out." But then she's like, "Yeah, we need to get to the coastline. We need a point of reference."
Right.
And I thought that was a good I thought that was a good way to go about it.
It was a good way of like playing neutral,
Yeah,
but
nice navigation skills.
So once Anya and Josie decide, like, okay, well, I guess we'll buy that for now. So then they follow Lena. And now they're trying to catch up with Dr. Ventress. And um, then, I don't know if you caught it, but Anya is now, like, stripped of her jacket. And we also see the tattoo on her forming of the figure eight. And then we, from there, we get. Hang on, I'm getting lost in my own notes. Oh, so once Lena, Anya, and Josie catch up with Ventress, they start trekking through the woods, and then after a while, they come across a boot with half of a foot in it, and they identify the boot belonging to Cass. So they think that, hey, maybe she's still alive. I mean, you could survive without a foot. That's a reasonable thought. They're like, oh, we have to go save her. We should go find her. Lena decides, like, you know what, I'll go. And Anya's like, oh, I'll go with you. And she's like, no, I'll go alone. And so Ventress is like, okay, well, we'll stay here. Come back as soon as you can. So Lena goes out to seek, following this trail, trying to find remnants of Cass and see if she's still alive. And after a short period, we see Lena um, discovering the body of Cass leaned up against this tree, and the throat of Cass has been bitten off. Um, and it's kind of graphic, you know. But obviously, Lena's like, okay, well, I came what I came what I set out to do. So let me go back to the team. She's dead.
Hmm.
Comes back to the team and says, yeah, she's gone, and you can tell Anya is in disbelief. Like she's confused, but she doesn't know what to believe. But she thinks that Lena is not there to help out the rest of the team. Like she almost looks at her as an enemy in that moment. Did you catch that?
Yeah, well, she definitely like kind of is reading like this disingenuousness from Lena's character. Like she's definitely becoming suspicious and not really believing like the intent and her intent, like kind of her integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And so she definitely will start challenging that. It's not so much a, okay, let's do the right thing. It's more like, okay, why are you here? What is the point of this? Like, whose interest do you have? Like, are you being reckless? Like questions like that.
Yeah, and once the team like regroups with each other after finding out about Cass, they move forward until they come across these what appeared to be like human-shaped bushes, or like short, like
Oh,
shrub
like
growths.
yeah, like no, I'm thinking like well, ecological like statues,
Mm-hmm.
like true statues, almost like ants, but they're much shorter.
Much
Um,
shorter, yeah.
yeah, it's much shorter, and obviously, all of us can deter like, oh, these must have been people. Like it was much for me. It was a much easier argument to have of saying, oh, these were people that turned into trees, rather than going, oh, the plants wanted to shape like a person. And then at that point, that's when Josie starts explaining this concept of reflecting or refracting, like kind of genetics.
Like a giant prism. She's like, you know what you would find in one of these leaves is like the human Hox genes. That's why these. That's why the bushes are shaped that way, because it came from like human DNA. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But
And,
yes,
and
go ahead.
and this is where I'm starting to feel conflicted about this movie, because they just kind of say it, and like it then from that point of explanation, it does shed light into just about 80% of this film. Like once she says, because for me, I'm going, oh, I'm guessing it's this kind of weird runoff of evolution that's kind of at a destructive rate. But then she's saying, oh, it's this, refracting of genes of different species where they're crossing over.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's causing, these like weird hybrid species. And that's what's causing like, this phenomenon. And, the rest of these encounters until the very end is not so much of, like it's almost like they're trying to be, the first half of this is mystery, and then the second half like, and I'm going, maybe then the second half survival, but I'm not feeling, oh, then the bear, I'm not feeling like threatened at that point. Like I don't feel urgency
Mm-hmm.
other than the bear and what happens with the bear. But even when the bear shows up, and then what we will talk about with the bear, like it makes sense because it's been explained. Like there isn't at that point, for a lot rest of the movie, there isn't like a mystery. Okay, so that's where I'm like, I start getting like confused, where I'm like, okay, what is this movie trying to be? Like I'm trying, like, is this like a horror mystery, or is this like survival? Like I don't, and I want to say that, oh, it's a new genre and it's gonna push it forward, but the audience didn't react that way because it feels like something's off. At like especially, and for me, it became really apparent at this point. So I wanted to make that comment.
I think this film would be categorized as a suspense thriller. One, because of the thematic effect and the tone of the film, being very mysterious. Like you don't have a lot of answers in the beginning, so it is kind of like a mystery you have to like unravel and put the pieces together, because you only get little snippets at a time. And like you were saying, like characters are mentioning things without it being challenged, and as the viewer, it's like, okay, so are we just accepting this, as the truth? And once they discover like the human shaped bushes, they find. Now I'm curious if you caught this, but they come across a house that they decide, oh, let's rest here for a bit. Does that house look familiar to you that they rest up in?
Is it her house?
It is almost a mirrored image of Lena's house. The layout is the same, the staircase, everything inside matches the opening shots of Lena's house. I thought that was interesting, but we don't know why it looks like that. Could have been the same set, you know.
I
um,
highly doubt that. But yes, I mean, because I know they do a decent amount of. I'm trying to piece together if the flashbacks were during that part of this scene, but that would make it easier to transition those flashbacks.
right afterwards, we get a flashback. So once they find Lena's duplicate house, I'm just gonna call it that, the mirrored house. Um, they decided to rest up there, and this is when Lena takes her own blood sample and put it under the scope and discovers that her cells are also shimmering.
Hmm.
And right after that reveal, she lifts up her head from the microscope, and Anya's there, with with her assault rifle, and knocks Lena out. And then we get the flashback to Lena and Dan's affair. They're having a discussion. Lena says like, "Oh, this is the last time. Like I feel guilty about this," and Dan's like, "Well, hey, like we meshed together very well. We were a good fit for each other." But he also states that he loves his wife, but he's willing to have these moments with Lena, sharing passion again with another woman. So it's like, you love your wife, but is this action also contradictory to that statement? Lena's feeling it. Dan's just there, like, you know, post-coital, just like relaxing, having transparent thoughts. Is like, yeah, man, we fit together, but I'm not leaving my wife for you. It's like, dude, what a dick. Um, but so after, I don't know, like, what was your? This is a question for you. What was your opinion on Lena's character at this point when the affair is actually revealed?
It seems it did seem reasonable to believe, and it seems predictable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you there's that trope that you hear about in terms of service people, and you know affairs happening like that because of the absence of the spouse.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of see some of the marital tension even when he was like you can almost feel like that the relationship wasn't great or perfect even before Kane's character even showed up. That's what I felt. I was like, oh, I'm not I'm not fully convinced that she's feeling this way primarily because he's missing or presumed dead. I feel like there's other layers to it. That's things that she is not fulfilled with.
Mm-hmm.
So it seemed very predictable and like reasonable to believe. I mean, obviously, when you first see it, you're like, oh, wait a minute, oh, what's going on? And at first, I thought it was during him being presumed dead, but then when you find out it's an affair, I was like, oh, okay. So for me, it wasn't that surprising.
Okay. Um, well, I'm trying to remember like my first viewing. Like I don't remember having a lot of emotional attachment to the characters. Uh, like I mean, obviously, I'm kind of rooting for Lena because she seems to be the predominant character and the lead. Obviously.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
you rooted for Lena, and I felt like Josie. I felt like those were the two characters that you were really rooting for.
you know,
Yeah.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, I mean, Ventress, I wasn't because I was kind of half liking her and half not liking her. And then with Anya's character, especially when she did the kind of the hostage situation, I was like,
Which is
okay,
next? Yeah,
yeah, which is next. I was like, all right, I don't like you anymore,
dude.
which is a natural thing to feel.
Well, what's funny is, especially in a scene coming up with Josie, I actually resonated more with Josie's character towards like the middle part of the film as well. Um, like
Well, I think Josie um die
we'll get into that.
before?
We'll get
Okay,
into
I'm
that. We'll
trying.
get into that. So Lena comes to, and she notices that Ventress, Josie are on the each side of her, and they're all tied up and bound in rope and cloth. And Anya's there in front of them, like she's about to do her own interrogation, but she's holding the locket that Lena had around her neck, and she sees that it's an image of one of one of
Of
the
Kane.
previous team members, which is Kane. So then she's like, okay, is this a brother? Is it a boyfriend? Is it a husband? And she's like, ah, okay, it's a husband. And so Anya's drawing these conclusions. And first of all, the way she's composing herself right now, Anya's character, I'm like, okay, the typical like hard, trying to be like a hard badass, and trying to like really act this shit out. I'm like, okay, I was kind of done with her character at this point. Now I'm like waiting for something to happen to her.
Oh, and something does.
Something does. But before that, she's questioning Lena, and then is like, "Who are you really here for?" Because clearly you're not, you're not committed to the team's mission. So what if everything that happened to that previous team is already happening to us? Like I feel like my mind is spiraling. When I look at my hands, I can see the lines on my fingertips moving, and I feel like I'm going crazy. Um, and then following that statement, she's like, "Well, what happens if I were to cut you open? Would I see the same slithering effect as the previous team? Like, is that going to happen? Let's find out." And she tries to go in, and
And I'm going, all right, plot armor, come on out.
exactly. And then we are reassured. Plot armor does come in, and we hear a cry from outside. It's like, "Help me!" And Anya recognizes the voice and is like, "Cass, I knew she was alive." And so she runs out, away from the team, in the chairs, and goes to the front door. And you hear her like, I think you hear her cry, but then you hear like a ooh, like, "Oh fuck, it's that bear! The bear is back!"
Bear in the big blue house.
So the bear like slowly walks through the doorway. We don't know what happened to Anya,
And now you're
and
asking about Cass. Like, okay, well then what the heck? Where's Cass then?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, you
how
don't
does that work?
exactly. How did we just hear her voice? So the bear comes in. Obviously, it's responding to like movement and reaction, which the team is not giving because they're all tied up, to their advantage. The bear kind of like comes in closer to them, sniffs around, and then we see a close-up image. And for sure, this is one of the most disturbing parts of the film is when you see the bear
Yes.
up close, and it almost looks like a Yao Guai from fucking Fallout. Like what in the irradiated bear is going on right now? But we see not just the bear skull, but the skin is kind of like off of the head of the bear, but covering the rest of the body.
It has like exposed flesh and bone.
And not only do we see the bear skull, but on the side of it we see a human skull and human characteristics. And this is supposed to imply that when the bear um, latched onto Cass earlier in the film, when she was snagged, that she ripped out the throat, and part of Cass started like mending in with the bear's genetic makeup, and that's why we were seeing a skull. And I don't know if you caught this, but like you can see the gloss of the eyes in the human skull on the side of the face of the bear. And I'm like,
Oh, I
oh,
did
this
not
is
see that.
so creepy. It's so creepy. So the bear like is in between Josie and Lena, and it like opens its mouth, and it doesn't let out a roar, but you hear like a help, and it's like, ugh, that part is so disturbing. Um,
It reminds me of it actually reminds me of a scene from an anime, Full Metal Alchemist, where what is it? The scientist character infuses like a dog with his daughter, and then the dog is like half human, half daughter, and he just goes, "Daddy hurt, it's hurting," and it's like, ugh, ugh.
yeah.
It's like everyone says it's like the most disturbing part of that show, and I feel like this is just in line with that.
Oh, interesting. I haven't seen that. But dude, it is kind of uncanny how it just like it takes like one moment or one scene in a film to just completely take you out of it, and you're just like, ugh. um,
Yeah, like creepy, not like horrifying, but creepy and like
yes.
unsettling.
So the bear is about to like latch onto Josie's shoulder, and once it does, and kudos to them. Because in this situation, if I already felt the jaws of a bear on my shoulder, like teasing me, I'm like, okay, I'm already done. Like, I already know I'm done. But they don't react, and then Anya comes to try to save the day, and this is my favorite part. And you could tell because of the lack of experience, she takes the gun, fires from the hip. She doesn't aim down the sights. She doesn't hold L1 before clicking R1 to trigger. and she blind fires in the direction of the team. She's like, and I don't know if this was like intentional to like just fire just to get the bear's attention or to kill it, but she gets the bear's attention, and it immediately gains speed and attacks Anya and rips her like her lower jaw off
Yes.
with the one wave of the claw. And I'm like, oh fuck, like now she's done. And then Josie, she's able to get a hold of her rifle and shoot at the bear and empties the mag into the face. And then we see the bear's like brains like splatter and blood everywhere. So they finally killed the bear. So now we have kill count: one gator down and one bear down, and
I
one
know,
team member. No,
good for them. There's no like, it's very straightforward how to kill these things.
yes,
Which, is kind of an interesting. I feel like that's subverting expectations. You just feel like as a viewer, it's like, oh, it's not going to be as simple as that. Like, when have you ever watched something that was scary and then shooting at it would kill it? No, like never. And if it does, it's because there's 10 more that they can't kill at the same time.
right, right. So I do like that. That's actually a good point because the trope in other films is when there's a threat that is overpowered to the degree of the heroes of the story, it usually does come back. Like they're able to damage it, and then it's like, oh, okay, I'll return later to catch you guys off guard. This one, it's just like, nope, here's a threat. Okay, threat eliminated. Now what? So now with two team members down, Josie, Lena, and Ventress are now left, and even after that, Ventress is literally still showing no remorse, no emotion for the loss of the team members, and she's just like, well, time to keep moving. I'm gonna leave, and then Lena and Josie are there, like, what the fuck, yo? Like, we're not going. So Ventress departs the party,
Let's leave.
and um, then this is actually one of my favorite scenes coming up. Josie then takes off her jacket, and then you see, first of all,
Oh
Tessa
yeah.
Thompson is
Ugh.
built. Like, she actually had muscles in this movie. And I'm like, okay. And you see on her arms the revealed cut marks from an earlier implication that she was
I was gonna
suicidal.
say,
Now you
were
see
they
that.
cut? Oh,
Hmm.
that's right. I thought they were cut because of the kind of foliage that's growing out of her arms. But you're just saying it's just cut.
They were already cut, and um, the vines were growing out of those existing wounds. That's why they were able to seep through. Um, but the important conversation that Josie has with Lena after the departure of Ventress is Josie's now in this calm state. Like, she's not scared. She seems pretty like content with where they are, and Lena's trying to ask her, like, what's going on, and Josie talks about them all being infected. And she's like, no matter what, like, we all have it. I know this. I can feel it in me. But everyone seems to be fighting it. Like, no one has thought to just accept it. It's almost like the conversation of why continue fighting upstream if it's so much easier to go downstream, go with the flow. That same mentality. Josie is like accepting that she has no control over the current situation. She can't understand it all, but she can accept that she doesn't understand it and go with the flow of the stream. So Josie leaves a few lasting remarks with Lena and then starts walking away. And as she's walking away, we can see like the vines, these little leaves growing out of the existing wounds and then moving up her arm and on her neck, and you just see like it's just weird. It's really weird, but it's really cool how they transitioned that. So then Lena's trying to like follow Josie and like, wait, where are you going? Like, Josie, wait up.
And
Josie
she
goes,
like basically like I implied that she like disappeared and basically like molded or infused with nature, like to the point where she was unrecognizable, and then she couldn't even see her because she had basically like evolved in with the environment.
it. What's interesting is I think I know which one she turned into because when
Oh,
Josie
you did? Because I was looking. I'm like, which one is it?
so when Josie turns around the corner behind this behind this hedge, Lena's like following her, but by the time Lena catches up to where Josie appeared to have vanished, she sees a bunch of these human-shaped genes like bushes like before. And if you caught this before Josie turned the corner, there were blossoms coming from her arm, and they were a reddish pink color. And when Lena turns around to try to find Josie, she sees all of these other bushes there, but there's one with the particular red pinkish flower that was blossoming from Josie before she turned the corner. So I think she was that red bush. Um, and I kind of thought that was an interesting send off because we don't see where she went, but we just are left there to imply. We're left there with the implication that she turned into one of those, and she's accepted it.
Mhm.
And it makes you wonder, like, because there's so many other, uh, like tree statues that were there. How many other people came to the same acceptance, like the same moment that Josie did? And this is like a pattern, you know. Uh, Also referencing the Ouroboros, the tattoo on their arm. It's an infinite loop. So all of these other previous teams, one of them or two of them, possibly came to the same realization that Josie did. Lena has no other choice but to move forward, right?
Mhm.
Um,
And go to the lighthouse.
and go to the lighthouse. Yeah,
Because she knows. Because I think she knows at this point that she's like probably not gonna. Even if she does get out, that it's probably. She probably doesn't have much longer.
yeah.
I
So
think I think she knows that she has a death warrant,
yeah, and
and
it's a race against
for,
time now.
yeah, and so she'd rather have that be like productive and go and kind of finish the investigation and then die.
Yeah. During the journey to the coastline, there's a scene where Lena breaks down and starts crying, but then gathers herself and continues walking. And I liked that moment because for a minute it like humanized her character a little bit more than we seen
Hmm.
earlier. Because she understands like the gravity of the situation. It's kind of up to me now. I don't know where Ventress is. I know, or I think I know what happened to the rest of the team. So I need to try to find Ventress. I need to go to the coastline. So she finally makes it to the coast. Sees the water, waves crashing against the shore. She drops her bag, drops her gear. Which this is also the interesting part. Is she once she gets close to the lighthouse, she sees a bunch of skeleton remains, possibly of like the other previous teams that went in.
Or even the people of the lighthouse. That's what I was thinking, more or less.
What was interesting, and this is the question I had, is if it was the people in the lighthouse, um, who put their who arranged their skeleton remains like that? Because the skulls were all separated from the body, planted in the sand, and the bodies were sit in like a they were set in like a sitting position on the shore. Um, so I don't know, like I don't know what really to make of that scene apart from it being one of the other previous team members that are just like laying, like almost like making like a burial site, like in memory of or honoring the fallen members, because they kind of resembled like tombstones in a graveyard. Um, so she goes into the lighthouse and sees a crater, um, and she sees like a setup like camera. And then next to the crater, she sees what appears to be another skeleton and a blast around it. Now that Lena has seen the video camera, she goes back to it and she hits play. She sees no other than her husband Kane.
Yeah, and then he's just like, I'm gonna light myself on fire, and I'm like, okay, that's a way to go. That seemed like a little much.
And he says like I thought I was myself, but now I'm not quite sure. And Um, and then he says to the person recording, like, when you get out of here, find Lena and and tell her, tell her about this. And we hear is I will. And then he grabs a grenade out of the backpack, and then he says, "Do you remember what he says?" He's like, "Do you know what happens like to someone that holds a phosphorus grenade?" He's like, "Well, you're about to find out." And then he like,
Which, whatever this entity not remembering that lesson, you know, because of what happens later.
mm-hmm. So yeah, then we see Kane annihilate himself with a grenade and just goes off. You don't hear a scream. You don't hear voices of struggle. So it's another form of like acceptance in that moment when you know there's nothing else that you can do. And then once the grenade has gone off and a giant flash happens, after that we see the cameraman come into view, and it's a duplicate of Kane in the same attire that he appeared to Lena as. Now that we have been revealed the truth that the copy that came to Lena is not her husband, but has memories and the appearance of her husband. So that's what I thought was interesting. So that duplicate version only could have what he remembers from Kane interacting with him, because what we realize is it almost like mimics the imitation of life, but can't quite acquire that whole essence of being. They can
Of
only,
humanity.
yeah, they can only be as what they observe, and which is also a tie-in with science. Like science is the practice of observation and testing. So this alien organism can only thrive if it has subjects that it can understand, that it can mimic. Then she hears a sound or a voice coming from deep within the crater. So then she,
And I don't know who in their right mind looks at that and goes, you know what? I'm gonna go in there.
I should go check it out.
I should go check that out. This
Here,
this giant black hole in a lighthouse.
well, I mean, at the end of the day, like they were there to find the source, the source of it. So if this is where the crater is, then the source has to be at the bottom, right? So
Hmm.
she dives into it, and once she gets to the bottom, it's like a stairwell. Once she gets to a certain point, starts walking down, and then we hear Ventress's voice. But what's so odd about this scene is it's dark and only in very minimal light, and we see Ventress like talking to herself, but her face is like warped in a way where her eyes aren't there. Did you catch that?
Yes, I do remember that.
It's like a smooth face. Um, and Lena like calls out to Ventress, and then Ventress like looks back at her and looks completely normal. And then Ventress alludes to saying like, "Well, I came here to find answers, but now I wish I hadn't. And whatever it is now in me." This spew of light emits from Lena's mouth. I mean, not Lena. Ventress. Light emits from Ventress's mouth, and then there's like the spiraling effect, and then Ventress pretty much like disappears into like this void, and all that's left is this spiraling, multicolored organism that almost looks like an eye, like an endless revealing eye. Like there's no
Hmm.
core of it, and in the center of it is just pure light. And Lena's looking at this like this shape that's just like floating and suspended in air. And
Like in Jujutsu Kaisen, like the infinite void.
the infinite void, yes, exactly. And so Lena's like staring into it, and you can see we get like a close up of Lena, and you can see like the light reflecting in the in the corneas of her eye, and then we see like a drop of blood lift from Lena's skin and get propelled into the entity, and then um, within a split second, we see a form happening in the shape like a humanoid form
Yeah.
after that drop of blood is inserted into the center of it, and now Lena is looking at this almost like iridescent humanoid shape and immediately tries to shoot at it. And what I thought was really cool was the bullets that were going into this creature or this form was like spiraling out of the body behind it and causing this like uh, almost like if a bullet was to travel through the body, what kind of havoc it would do. But instead, it shoots out this like strand and kind of curls in a way. So then Lena's like, okay, well the weapon's not going to work. So then drops that and starts running back through the crater that she originally went in, and then gets back to the room where Kane had died and where the camera is. And the entity is then in that same room when she gets there. It's already there, like it transported, just like Kane supposedly transported to the house. So very similarly, now Lena is like face to face with this threat.
And it's and it but it isn't a threat though. Like it's like this weird with especially the capabilities of it. You know, I mean, your definite fear is like death. Like this thing's going to attack and kill you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just starts like following and mimicking her and like embracing her, and it was really weird, and I think it was unnerving because it was unpredictable.
Yeah.
Because I'm sitting there going like, oh, it's dead, it's gonna get you, or like, oh, it's gonna try to beeline and try to kill you, and it's not, but it won't let you leave, and it's like this like kind of Stockholm syndrome kind of, I don't know, it was some kind of hostage situation. It's really weird and unnerving.
Well, you kind of said it. It's like it's I mean, Lena sees it as a threat, but the viewer, it's like it's not doing anything to attack you. It just has like a menacing vibe. And it doesn't act upon impulse like Lena does. Lena tries to escape and gets pushed up against the door by this thing, but what I thought was happening in this scene is every bit of force that Lena is getting or giving to get out, the entity is also applying that same measure to stop her from doing so.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Now I'm curious what you think, but like when she's pushed up against the door and the entity is
Ugh,
like pushed
weird.
up against her, is that scene, was it, because this is what I struggle with. In my mind, I think Lena um, realized that whatever force she's applying, it's applying to her at the in the opposite direction, and she then decides to like fall backwards, and the entity falls in the same manner as she does. So my
Yeah,
question,
learning through imitation,
right,
essentially.
right. My question to you is: do you think Lena was just struggling and trying to push, and then exhausted herself to the point of collapse, or did she realize that if I fall down, it'll fall down too?
No, I think she realized if she fell. I
Okay.
think that she was realizing it.
See, I think so too.
Yeah.
I think so too. And just like through certain like key like facial expressions, especially like the look in her eyes, I think that was it. Like I think that's when she discovered it. When she gets up, uh, she sees that the entity is now, after touching her, is now starting to form her own face and likeness. Even like the blood, like the blood on the side of Lena's face, it's matching on the entity. So it's almost like a duplicate image of Lena. And but you can still tell it's
And
empty.
this is what now obviously then the kind of source of it gets, I'm going to fast forward here a little bit because
Hmm.
I think this is important. Obviously, actually, no, no. How about this? continue with this thought, get to the end, and I want to revisit this like occurrence with something that connects in the future
Okay.
and what's something that connects in the beginning of the film. Sorry, go on.
Okay. So Lena is able to outsmart this alien with one of the grenades that was in the backpack, the phosphorus grenade. So she sees that it's mimicking her movement. So it's like, well, hey, why don't I approach this differently? Let me grab the grenade, and if I grab the grenade, then maybe the entity will grab the grenade. So then uh, instead of throwing the grenade at the entity, she pulls the pin after handing it to the entity, and the entity takes it willingly, and then is now holding the grenade. We see Lena like walk away as the grenade is going off in the entity's hand, and then Lena's able to like make the escape. Meanwhile, the entity is now carrying this lit grenade, and it's like obviously it's going off, and the entity is like catching on, catching fire. But instead of the entity chasing after Lena, it goes to the bottom of that, the tomb that they were in, and it starts touching everything in the lighthouse.
Yeah, it's like go okay, don't do that. You're literally destroying your home. I don't know why you're being this self-destructive. Like it's a sticky flame, and it's like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna roll all around in my house with it. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
why?
But it's almost like it's a new form of creation that this entity has, and it wants to share it with the hive, right? Like the hive mind. And so then the lighthouse catches flame, and
And
we
all the trees and all the affected area starts that I'm assuming catches flame.
yes, and Lena's just out at the beach, while the shimmer is now appearing to come down. We don't actually see the shimmer dissipate, but everything around the lighthouse is breaking down as if the shimmer has left. After Lena outsmarts the alien and lighthouse burns, um, we're then brought back to the current moment, earlier in the film, where the hazmat guys are talking to Lena, and then Lena says, like, so it was alien. It was creating life, or changing it instead of like destroying it. Like there was more creation within the shimmer than there was destruction. Lomax says, like, now you're the only other person that's come out. Um, Kane is now out of the coma as soon as the shimmer lifted. So now Kane is okay, or the duplicate version of Kane is good. Um,
And this is what I want to get to.
hmm.
And it's so funny is just having this conversation. I've kind of had the little epiphany and answered my own question, and it just happened within the last 5 minutes because I think the thing that I was asking myself is, okay, whatever the species is about what 2/3 of this movie's in. I'm like, oh, once we figure out that basically the clone Kane's character is a clone that's currently alive right now.
Mm-hmm.
My question goes is, well, how does he have memories of his spouse? Like, how did he know to go home? Like, yes, this is a biological transfer, and you know I mean, and then we can go deeper into questions of like, language and other motor functions. But like, if you're doing kind of a case of copying, what's the case, or what's the argument for being able to recall those things? And then at the end of this movie, though, Kane's character kills himself and a clone is made of him and goes out. But in this one, the clone infects the host of Lena.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how Lena is not a clone, but it's definitely mutated to be what the clone is, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I'm trying to say is more, why is it that Kane's character didn't have, like this would in itself explain memories, in that like Lena's character would have it and then Kane's character wouldn't, because Lena's still her normal self. So maybe I'll revert back because I realized I just did this giant circle and kind of contradicted myself. It's no, I'm like it's literally like happening to me as we were like talking about it, was because that was my question was being had, is because she's being interviewed and I'm like, okay, now at the end of this movie, like, okay, she's supposed to be this clone character. How would she be able to recall certain things, and that maybe Kane's character couldn't? That's why. That's what I wanted to say,
Because
and
I
I thought that was interesting. And
hmm.
maybe Kane's, I don't know, maybe Kane's clone. You know, they had a conversation with Kane, and he was like, "Well, this is where I live, and here's core things of how to do basic instructions." But that was probably like one of my biggest questions at the end of the film.
Yeah, because at in the video of Kane's death, Kane says like, "I thought I knew who I was," but when you're seeing, here's the thing that's a really like mind trip is if you were to see a mirrored image of yourself standing in front of you, um, how would you react? Like, would you know you're the clone or not, or would you think that you're the original being? But what we understand is when you're in the shimmer, your mind's kind of like spiral. Like you don't know exactly what to think. Everything is changing. Once you set foot into the shimmer, you're already infected. That's basically what's implied when Lena looks at the blood sample. Like she sees that the shimmering cells are in there dividing and replicating, and we see the tattoo of the symbol on their forearms. So it's like that's already a sign of like the mark, like you are a carrier now of this genetic mutation. Um, and what I thought was interesting, before Lena leaves the interrogation room, is it's very similar to the beginning with the whole glass of water. But the only difference with this one is when Lena takes a drink of the water, she doesn't respond to Lomax's questions at first. She investigates the water glass to see if there was blood in it, like there was for Kane in the beginning. And she doesn't see the blood. So she's like, okay, I am myself. But she knows she already is carrying the mutation. So what's interesting is the last shot is Lena asking Lomax, like, can I see my husband now? So she goes into the room where Kane is at, and both seem unsure of what the truth is. They come together and they hug, and this is the part that brings questions to me, and I'll ask you the same thing, is when they embrace in that hug, you can see Kane's eyes, and you can see like the shimmer in the cornea of their eyes, and then it cuts over to Lena, and then her eyes are also doing the same thing,
Yeah.
and then cuts to black. Now,
In
this
my opinion, that's basically that the host survived. Like, yes, you did burn its environment, but it was able to detach into the external environment, and it's not bound to this like kind of um, what
to
was it, perimeter.
the prism,
It
yeah,
the
it's
prism,
now
yeah,
left the confines of the source of impact. Now there's no shimmer, and now you have two beings with the genetic makeup of what was originally in that shimmer. So now it's like, okay, well, where could this movie go from there? And they haven't talked about a sequel. I don't know if a sequel would ever come out. I mean, the books are
I
out there, but
I at this rate, I honestly don't think there will be like 6 years, and also with that kind of reception, I think there'd be a remake before a sequel.
see, I don't know. Like, I almost think that this movie will not get touched. I don't think a continuation will ever get touched. Because I don't. Alex Garland has said like I'm not planning to do a continuation. And if you look at his movies, he doesn't do continuations. He just does one-offs. So I kind of respect that about him. So even if this were to get an additional story, uh, stemming from the other books, it won't be him. But again, like kind of like what you're saying, like this movie kind of broke even, so would it justify to make a sequel? But then again, it's like 6 years is nothing compared to movies that have gotten sequels after 30 something years. You know what I mean? 25
Mhm.
years, 30 years.
But I
They
just think it's a
find a
little
reason.
different because
It's not a
this is like a
franchise film.
trilogy. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a yeah. Now that we're at the end of it, I think my overall reception to it is I feel like this film is caught in the middle between two genres of film. Like kind of what I've been saying earlier. Like I feel like this movie is like Arrival and Alien put together with more emphasis on Arrival. But my challenge with it, and I think why it wasn't better received, was, you know, the mystery part is already kind of understood at a certain point where, like for me, I've had, I was talking to dad, and I was like, oh, I had this kind of assumption with it, and then when they basically explained it, I was like, oh, okay, all right, so that's kind of, it's almost like they already told the secret,
Mhm.
and that there was nothing new that I was going to be learning, or nothing that was really going to be like mysterious about it. And so that's where I was expecting a stronger shift to being maybe more of like a survival ish kind of like alien type film. And
Mhm.
it didn't do that. It just kind of kept being this mysteriousness where I wasn't like curious. I was just more confused, or I was just more like trying to understand the relevance of like what was happening.
Mhm.
And so for me, I just felt like there was this tonal disconnect. And by the end of it, I'm like, oh, okay, that was like I had a feeling that was what was going to happen, because once you, especially after you see the videotape, I'm like, oh, he's one of them. Okay, well, so I know there's already one of them outside.
Yeah.
So then when it shows her that she's outside, I'm like, okay, well, I already knew that was already going to happen because he's basically that character. And so I think that's just where, I think like in Arrival, like here's maybe my comparison. In Arrival, you're trying to just figure out like what these aliens are about and like what they want and like
Mhm.
what's the end game of what these aliens want to do. And then you get this big breaking point of like dimensional travel, which I believe is dimensional or time travel, like a form of time travel. And like that becomes like the big climax and reveal at the end that like basically just kind of wraps up the whole plot and creates this climax. Here I just was like I didn't feel like nothing got, I mean, it did get resolved, but I was like, I don't feel like there was like I understood anything about it. It just is like things just happen. I mean, maybe this might have been a really good film if it came out, I'm gonna say like 50 years ago when films like that were very common, where things would just happen and then the movie would end. But I feel like with this audience, I don't feel like you could do that. So, and I will say this. I mean, that is a feedback. I do want to give one shout out about I think what this film does a great job at. I think this film does a fantastic job at like being a great, I don't want to call it a feminist film, but a great female representation film that doesn't rely on the weight of other like male characters, because sometimes you have female characters or a female cast, and either you could tell that they're just trying to check boxes and that doesn't seem genuine, like it seems forced, or they reference male characters or idolize them in a way that doesn't give them any kind of empowerment. um, I thought this was a very genuine kind of casting choice and genuine female driven film that was realistic and reasonable to believe. It didn't feel like it was forced. Like sometimes you see films
Yes.
like this and they just check boxes and you're just like, this isn't, you're like, I know you're doing this to appeal to the audience, not because you actually believe this can happen. I genuinely believe that this scenario could happen.
What I liked about this film is they don't sugarcoat and they don't follow the same tropes of using heavy exposition to explain the film. They put together things as the other characters are finding out. Really respect that when when a director trusts the audience and just gives them very little going into it. but I feel like movies nowadays, they don't trust the audience, and they want you to just be in. They want you to know what's going on so that the character's actions are justified after that, instead of.
I yes, and I do I do think that the choice of them explaining it, well, I wouldn't have gotten it. I'll be humble and say that I wouldn't have got like kind of the phenomenon that was happening in the film.
Yeah.
But I think it was better for them to explain it than not explain it. Because okay, maybe not, because then there would be some kind of left mystery out of it. Um,
I mean, there is a mystery towards the
I,
end.
s-
Huh, go ahead.
I see an argument towards both. Actually, no, I see the argument to explain it because yes, like I think what you're about to say is there's a different mystery in the last act of the film. And so if you don't give some clarity to some of the world that the last act, I think people would just walk out of that confused and frustrated. Kind of like with The Happening where you're like, what was this?
Oh
Like
God.
why were they doing that?
You guys like hot dogs? Oh my gosh. Well,
Help me.
here's the question that I was left with as a viewer. The questions I had at the end is the intent of the alien organism, like what its purpose was. Do you think its purpose was to like annihilate, like in the title of the film, or do you think it was there to create something new? Like, what was your interpretation of the organism's purpose?
Hmm. So I think this kind of you make the analogy of like what a virus is.
Mm-hmm.
Like a virus is like with all organisms is, driven with the purpose of like survival,
By
right?
spreading, yeah.
Yeah, by spreading, but and a lot of times with viruses where either you want to spread a lot, you want to kind of grow and spread, but you also don't want to like kill your host. Like unfortunately a lot of them do, which makes some of them, deadly, but maybe not as successful, but they want to like if they could, they would just want you to feel ill but not kill you because they want to keep growing and they want to not destroy the host that they're growing within.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like if you look at it from a virus perspective, it's the goal is to spread. But with this kind of mutation and with the themes of like things like cancer isn't like in a virus that you cough on something, it doesn't transfer. It's a mutation within your own body that tries to it's a defect mutation, or not defect mutation, but it's a mutation within your body that tries to kill you,
Mm-hmm.
that will most likely, without being treated, will kill
Yes.
you. And it doesn't spread like a virus does. So I look at this as from the perspective, and unfortunately this is an alien, so it's nature on different planets can be completely foreign to us, but if I had looked at it from a virus perspective, its goal is to spread and dominate the landscape, which doesn't always mean like kill people, but that can be a byproduct of it. Like
Correct.
all viruses aren't intending to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
Like their goal is to stay alive, but they will, a lot of them do end up killing people. And it's in a, this habitat that it had, it was growing, trying to again grow. And then when it encountered like this, another form of expansion was kind of, to infect and act as like a host that can travel outside of those borders. So it basically succeeded because now it's like, oh, it was only to be able to exist within this confined environment, confined space. Now it's able to infect within people, and it can survive with these two even when you know its kind of home is destroyed. And I mean, that would be kind of our goal, wouldn't you think? I mean, a lot of people give like analogies of like humans being viruses. Yeah, yeah, we can have a whole philosophical debate about that.
Mm-hmm.
But like one of our goals as a human race, as within humanity, is to explore have interplanetary travel and exploration and colonization. Why? And have it done successfully because if for some reason our home was not habitable anymore and we couldn't survive there. We want our species to still survive.
Yeah.
And so I believe that's what this is doing. It's acting as a virus.
So now this virus can continue to spread, but it no longer has like a home base. It can now replicate anywhere within the human genes. So yeah, I do really enjoy this movie. I'm glad I got to rewatch it again. I'm glad you
And
sent
I'm
it.
actually glad. I'm glad I got to watch it. I wasn't as scared as I thought I was going to be. I thought I wasn't going to like it because I'd be too scared.
Yeah, and to this day, again, like not many people talk about this film, so it's one of the reasons why I wanted us like to discuss it, because I do think it is a bit underrated. Because going back to your comment on a predominantly female-driven cast, I thought that it did justice for the characters. It gave them both characteristics that we see in other films that some people relate to or attach to. I really enjoyed that it just again hitting it again heavy-handedly by not being felt like I understood everything as it was happening. It's just you're slowly putting pieces together. It wasn't the direction of the film wasn't afraid to like lead you astray and leave you with your thoughts. I think that's the whole intent. Is what do you think this means? Like what's your version? Almost like looking at art. Art's subjective. In the eye of the beholder, it could be anything. You know. Um, so yeah, that was it was a movie. It was a movie. Things happened. People died.
There was a plot, and there was a beginning, middle, and end,
Yep.
and it ended with a message. And
I
if you understood that message or not, that's you. That was up to you.
exactly. Um, well, everyone, thank you again for tuning in. Thanks again, buddy, for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. Until next time, take care.